talking, it's saying it has a camera. You put video of you in there. Okay, so that's okay.
Yes. The Lord be with you. Good morning to all of you. Part 3 in our series on faith, film, and the American dream. This morning will be more faith and film and less the American dream. You know, you kind of bounce around among these topics. Sometimes they're all together at once, and sometimes you focus a little more on one than the other. We're going to use It's a Wonderful Life this morning also to talk about a few more things. I want to start by mentioning that this is a well-beloved movie, and if you actually look at different kinds of rankings for the best movie of all time, the IMDb database ranks it number 21 of all time. The American Film Institute, number 20. Variety magazine, number 8. Parade magazine ranks it number 17. Rotten Tomatoes, 262, if you're into Rotten Tomatoes but still that's in the top 300, which is significant given how many films there are. And it kind of raises the question, why so popular? And there are many factors at work why people like films or think films are good, just as with anything else, and especially since people can interpret things a lot of different ways. If you ask, well, the most common response, I think, how was the movie? The most common response is either to say, well, that was a good movie, or that was not a good movie. But what do we mean by good? It's actually hard to articulate what. Is it good just because you liked it? But why did you like it? You know, it's kind of hard to articulate exactly what we mean by all of that. I think there's a lot of things going on with it. It's a Wonderful Life. But I want to just point out two things. One is a point I made from last week, that despite George Bailey's character of his dark side of getting anger, there's this other side to him that consistently sacrifices his dreams for others. And I would argue that is very, very appealing, and that there's something theological about that. That we as human beings, it's part of the Imago Dei. We as human beings are made in the image of God, and there are different ways we can reflect that. And in the film, we get a character who in one aspect is Christ-like. He has these dreams, but he sacrifices those for the good of other people. And I think on some level that is appealing to people. And it's also a rather unique premise for an American film, right? So let's do this little exercise that I did last week. I'm thinking of a film, not It's a Wonderful Life, where an individual has hopes and dreams and goals in life, and this individual continually gives up those goals for the benefit of other people. Can you name that a film other than It's a Wonderful Life? The Godfather? Well, he wants to help the family. Yes, that's true. He wants to help the family, so he does, and he agrees to do things like murder people for the family. In an odd way, yeah. There are films where people go off to war and maybe sacrifice their life. But here's the point. When I asked you about the classic American plot, you know, a basic adventure movie plot, immediately we had all kinds that came to it. I asked you about, you know, the classic Hollywood plot. The other form was in a romantic comedy. We can name all kinds of those that fit that sort of premise. This is a bit different kind of premise, and it's not, by the way, the premise of the American dream when you get right down to it. To sacrifice, to give up your hopes and dreams for others is a different kind. So I think on some level it is appealing because it actually, whether people, and most people maybe do not realize it, but that it actually reflects something about what it would be to, one aspect of what it would be more Christ-like. But okay, so that's one point. But the second thing that I want to say about It's a Wonderful Life, and this really applies to all films, is to think of another issue with films. So a number of years ago, my nieces decided to make their own film when they were in like junior high age. They're from Minnesota, and they would come down to visit their grandparents every summer for a few days or about a week. And somehow they got the idea, there were 4 of them, and they got the idea that we're going to remake Harry Potter and the Sorcerer's Stone. And so they, used the house and had a camera, and they filmed things and basically cut down the plot. And this was this epic project that took 3 summers to put together. And in the end, they put together like a 20 or 25 minute film, and we watched it, and it was delightful because they were our nieces. Right? And they did some clever things, to fly on the broom. They filmed from below and somebody jumped and, okay, well, that was fun. But would anybody else watch that film? No. That film would not, that film, nobody else would be interested in that film. Why? Because that gets at an important point I want to get to today. Why will people read, millions and millions of people read the book, the original book, and why will millions of people watch the Hollywood production of Harry Potter and the Sorcerer's Stone? What's the difference between that and, the cute little film that my nieces put together? Well, I have a personal connection to my nieces, and they don't have a personal connection. Other people don't have a personal connection, right? That's right. Although we don't really have a personal connection to J.K. Rowling or the filmmaker. Everybody else is doing it? Yeah. Okay, so part of it is popularity. I mean, wouldn't you say the Hollywood production is just a better film? More fancy stuff. They're doing a number of things that are very, very compelling, right, to audiences. And that's what I want to dive into a little bit today, because there's something there that we need to look at a little more carefully. And there is something there that is actually tied to Christian faith. So there's a scholar by the name of Judith Wolf who talks about art and aesthetic qualities. And she calls this the theological imagination. Now, okay, so now we're getting into some theology and philosophy here, so let me try to summarize this a little bit without getting lost too much, or if I get nervous and call for help, I'll ask Brad. But theological imagination actually can be a number of different things, but let's talk first about imagination. And the common definition of imagination is like a land of make-believe, unicorns and trolls or something like that, which is fine, but she uses this imagination in a different sort of way. She goes to a philosophical understanding of imagination that is much bigger, and it is that from Kant and Hume, if you're interested in those sorts of things. But it says that there's a sense within us as humans, a quality within us that helps us make sense out of the things we perceive. And usually we think of perception as sight, but it can be through any of our senses. Could also be things we hear, for instance. And we see and hear, we perceive things, and we have to make sense of us, and that is the imagination. And so a lot of times this comes through one way it comes through commonly is through symbols and patterns. So for instance, here's a symbol. You know what this symbol is. And when you see this symbol, the letter F, we think, okay, well, there's a sound. And with that, you can put it together with other things. If you add an A and a C and an E to it, face. Now we've got symbols up there, but that represents something that we understand. That's our imagination connects those symbols together to say, this is communicating something. And I can think, well, a face of some sort. Or you can put two dots and a curve within a circle. And we look at that and say, well, that's a face. Our imagination really looks at that symbol and interprets it as something that it represents something out there in reality. Or we can look at pictures of people with different faces, and we can interpret what is going on inside of them. Right? I interpret this as happiness and anger and surprise, or at least what they're representing. It's an actress, I'm sure, who is doing this. I have no idea what she's really feeling at the moment when they're taking her picture. It's like, give us a happy face, and she gives a happy face. But no, we interpret that. We interpret faces as particular sort of thing. So what Wolf calls this there's a philosophical way of defining this as imagination when we look at this and say this is what's going on. And it's not an escape from reality, it's a way to interpret reality when we see somebody. Okay, this has implication for art. And when I say art, I mean visual art like painting, but also music and literature, theater, but also film. That what art does is it presents us with something that helps point us to reality, to help us perceive something that we have not perceived before, or perceive something in a way that we have not perceived before, or to see something different that we haven't seen, or maybe see something in a deeper way than what we have seen before. And this has theological implications, to be able to see things in a new and different ways. But the point is that God has put this sense, this type of imagination within all of us, that we are all able to, even music, hear music, and it gives us some sort of sense of, a really powerful piece of music sends us to someplace new, or we read a very effective story, or we see, I can remember being in Florence and seeing Michelangelo's David for the first time. My wife and we just stood there. I couldn't put into words how awe-inspiring that was. It was drawing me into something in some sense that I had never seen before. Now, Christian faith, can be tied to this understanding of imagination, especially if we, as Christians, are able to see the world as Christians through the Christian story. Because what art should do is point us to something that is true or real that we have not seen in some sort of way. And this is a way of knowing that is not so much like somebody makes an argument and you listen to that argument and say, oh, I think that's true, or you present this evidence and, oh, there's it, or you just make a decision. This is a way of knowing when our perceptions shift. We on some aspect of the world, we looked at it or thought about it in a particular way, and now something's presented to us, and something shifts. We're seeing things in a bit different way. Or let's talk about this biblically. Jesus does this, just to give one example, in a lot of different ways, but one example. Jesus does this with parables. A parable is not just a story, it has a moral at the end, and then these people went out, and so the moral of the story is be nice. That's not really, parables are much deeper than that. even if they're very, very short. Parables, what parables do is you can't just kind of look at them and say, well, you can, but you're not going to get them if you just look at them and just move on. Okay, there's the point of the parable, move on. You have to enter into the parable. This is the imagination where you enter into it, and now you're trying to perceive what is he saying, and you enter into it, and parables prod us to look at the world maybe in a new way or a deeper way, especially if you think about how they were taken in context of the time, right? So Jesus takes common ordinary things of life and presents listeners with a puzzle, or pushes them out of their comfort zone, or challenges them to think in a particular sort of way. So, for instance, Jesus' ministry. Matthew 13. Jesus is out by a lake on a beach. Huge crowd has gathered. They want something's very special about this man. He's a prophet or he's something, and they want to hear something from him. They want to hear something big, something dramatic from him. And so he gathers and he tells them about seeds falling on a path and rocky soil and good soil. Okay. What is that? Okay, why are you talking about things growing? Or you think of Jews who are oppressed by the powerful empire of Rome with its massive army and its political system and its economic power and its transportation system. And the Jews are steeped in this history of a kingdom, King David, the greatest king of all. And you're yearning for the kingdom, a new Jewish kingdom to be different, maybe overthrowing the Roman kingdom. And Jesus comes and speaks about the kingdom, and he tells one-sentence stories about the kingdom involving a mustard seed or a pearl or yeast. That's the kingdom. Okay. Now you have to kind of dig in further to say, what is this guy up to with all of this? And so all the other parables take common ordinary things, Samaritans helping a beat-up traveler, a son going into full-blown rebellion. The father immediately welcomes him when he comes home. Fig trees, wineskins, all that sort of stuff. Workers and talents and so forth. Using ordinary life to shift people's perception, to see things in a different way, in a new way. And even in Jesus' life, apart from the parables, right? He tells the fishermen, well, now I'm going to make you fishers of men. What? What is that? Telling the disciples, you must wash other people's feet as I'm going to wash your feet. Wait, what? Taking expectations and in some ways turning them upside down so they can perceive or see things different way. Now, good art does this. Good, effective art should do this, drawing us into something and helping us to see things that we have not seen before. And therefore, there is a connection between aesthetics, art, and the Christian life. The Christian life in discipleship, right? Part of it is we need to see things more clearly. We need to see ourselves, we need to see others, we need to see God more clearly. We don't have everything, we don't see everything exactly right. And I'm using, right in a metaphorical way as well as maybe a literal way here. So art can help us with this. Now, a bit of a caveat. We are also flawed and limited people, and people who produce art are flawed and limited. And so art can have its flaws also. It can corrupt our imagination, because this is the nature of the world we live in. It can claim this is what we're supposed to see, and that can be off base. But that's a caveat. That's maybe a discussion for another day, for another time, and other people maybe to come in and do this. But film can be artistic. Film can actually be art. It's a very new art. It's a recent art because of technology. sometimes you hear the term art films. That's when people are doing that more more consciously, trying to use film to make some sort of part by focusing on the aesthetic sort of thing, something beyond just entertainment. So I'm going to, but I think all films have some aesthetic, artistic parts to them, which is why they're more compelling than my niece's films about Harry Potter. Even though that is very compelling to us as a family, though I have to convince we haven't seen that since its very first production. But nevertheless, that was wonderful. It shows, you know, I've got great nieces and so forth. So what I want to do here with the remaining time is help us think about how to view films from an aesthetic or artistic point of view. There are ways we can view movies more effectively, if you will, because every field of art, you really need to be trained and you need to have some experience. And I mean, we take classes on how to read literature, right? You take high school classes on that. You can take classes on understanding painting. You take classes on music theory. And how to, you know, do that. So this can be done, this is sort of what we will call cinematic analysis. So this morning, I'd like, and there's a lot to it, and I'm not an expert in it, but like I said, I team taught this with my friend who was a film studies guy, and I learned a lot from him, and so this is basic film studies 101, because I can't go beyond basic. But let me give you some basic sort of things. Some tools this morning to help us read better and understand why films grab us. Some films grab us more than others. Okay, so the first one I actually talked about last week, narrative patterns. Films tell a story. What's the pattern of the storytelling? The great question last week somebody asked, I can't remember who it is, but I'll just say, good job once again, was why the angel? Right, and then we talked about why. Why does It's a Wonderful Life use that angel? That's a pattern within the narrative. There's a creative, artistic choice there, and it helps George go into, right, the weird world where he doesn't exist anymore, but we're right there with him. We have entered into the story, and we also are seeing his world, and it shifts his perceptions. He's ready to commit suicide until he goes into that world. It shifts his understanding of his whole life. And he's like, no, I want to live. And we're like, yes, we want George to live too. It shifts our perceptions also. See, that technique of going to that world without George Bailey, it was a very interesting, creative, and I would say artistic move. So I'm not going to say much more about that because we covered that last week. But that's one thing you can think about. Narrative pattern. Why is the story told in the way it's, what's included, what isn't included? There's a lot of things that can fall into that category. Okay, here's another one. Visual tropes. A trope can be like a metaphor that is repeated or comes up from time to time, and there are a number of different kinds of tropes, but in film and in painting, it can be visual. So, for instance, and it can be a trope we understand, or maybe we understand as a trope. If you know much about literature, you would realize that a crow is a trope. Right? Crows are, what kind of birds are crows? You know, they're kind of black and a bit rough around the edges, and they eat roadkill, and you know, their voice, they've got that, you know, sound to it. You know, it's not a warbler singing sweetly. And so in literature, Shakespeare had crows appear in Julius Caesar right before Julius Caesar was killed. Right? A crow is often a trope, a metaphor for some well, sometimes death or some sort of crisis, something bad that is about to happen, or something really mysterious. So Edgar Allan Poe, Once Upon a Midnight Airy, while I wandered weep and weary over something of forgotten lore, the raven, and quote, the raven, nevermore. Something that's just kind of uneasy and spooky about what is going on with that raven knocking on my chamber door. Some sort of fate is coming and it's not good. It doesn't seem good. Do you remember the crow in It's a Wonderful Life? Okay, see, and here's another thing. The tropes can be there and you may not see them. You may not recognize them. But Uncle Billy has a crow. And every now and then the crow appears, and every now and then the crow goes, rah! And it's usually when there's a crisis in the building and loan. Okay, so here's the film. There are filmmakers who put things in that you may catch or may not catch, and sometimes you take them in, but you don't even realize the significance of them. How about one that I think you probably do remember? This is a trope that is, I mean, the crow is connected to things outside of the film itself in literature and the harbinger of doom. And if you're a Cleveland Browns fan, you might feel that way about the Lamar Jackson, the Baltimore Ravens coming into town and so forth. Maybe that's the intent of the football team, why they Edgar Allan Poe was from Baltimore. But there are some tropes that are created by the filmmaker within the film itself. They only really appear in the film itself. So, do you remember the knob on the stairway? Right? And so here's the thing about trope. It repeats. It comes back again. And each time it comes back, you add a little bit of meaning to it, right? And the first time George is walking up and he grabs that knob and it comes off and he's, ah. And that means something, right? It's like, oh, this house. Which is an expression of his frustration that his dreams have not been met. Then there's another time he's running up and he grabs it and he's angry. This house. And he puts it back. But at the very end, after he's been through the weird George Bailey does not exist world, and he comes back and he's so happy, he's running up and he grabs, you remember this? He grabs it and he kisses it. Oh, I'm so happy. And it's a reminder to George that he has things that are very, very good. So it's a wonderful little visual thing that is put in there. But it's put in there and it serves as a metaphor. And even if we don't think of it as a metaphor, when we see him act that way, we know what he's talking about. We know what he's doing. Films will put in, filmmakers, good ones, will put in visual tropes in a number of things. Anytime you see something that is significant or has some sort of meaning. Sometimes it actually is a hint for something that's going to happen in the plot to come. It's used in a lot of different ways. But that helps us, this helps us see things or perceive things that we might not otherwise perceive, or just gives an added layer to this part of the story that we know about. It helps us feel with George, yes, we do like this house, even though the knob just keeps falling off and so forth. Okay, then there's another category called cinematic devices, and this is a kind of a catch-all category because there's all kinds of things under cinematic devices. Cinematic devices technically are anything you can do, anything that a movie can do that other forms of art cannot do. There are very particular things because of technology that movies can do. For instance, the chase scene is a particular movie kind of thing, right? We've all seen movies with chase scenes. That's really hard to do in the same way in a painting or in a book, literature, or in music. But boy, you can do it and do it wildly. There's some hilarious chase scenes. There's some scary chase scenes. You can do that in a film. All right, so what sort of things do you do? Well, let's talk about different kinds of cinematic devices here, because it involves a lot of different kinds of things. The first one is, let's talk about Scenes of George Bailey. So, very early on, when we're getting introduced to George Bailey, you remember this, the very first scene. He's talking very excitedly in the drugstore about where he's going to go and the vacation and so forth. And all of a sudden it freezes, right? And it freezes on this. Okay, so freezing. On stage in theater, sometimes the people freeze. But you can only go so far with that. You can't freeze a ball in midair in the theater, but you can in a film, right? That's an example of a cinematic device. But there's more to it than that. The other thing is that in this freeze, we get a close-up. Okay, this is what cameras can do. It can bring us right up to a close-up of the person. And what that does is it draws us into that character. And we get close-ups particularly of protagonists or the main characters. And what close-ups are designed to do is to get us intimately connected with this person. We probably want to identify with him, usually. But we also, you might want to get a sense of what is going on with him. What's going on inside of him? Or her. Him or her. In this case, I'm thinking him because of George Bailey. So this not only freezes, we get this close-up. And in fact, what we're drawn to is... well, we're drawn to the face, right? That's what happens with it. And in fact, in the film, right, he freezes partly not only for us, but also for the angel, right? It's that, oh, look at that face. It's a nice face, says Clarence. And in this, we catch with the face in the context that George is energetic, he's optimistic, he's happy. We're drawn to him. He seems like a pretty nice guy. But I want to point out also that when you do this, there are other filmic things going on, like lighting. Okay, so this is lit a particular sort of way. It's lit in bright colors. I mean, it's the atmosphere is bright, not colors. It's black and white. It's the atmosphere is bright, and we get shadows on George's face. Most of the face is lit up, but the shadows give his face. It's very interesting face. It's got his eyebrow is up, and you can see his right eye is shining more than the others, and the light is glistening off of his hair. And filmmakers do all kinds of things to get the exact lighting. They've got a dominant light down here on this side shining up, but they've also got the background is lit up, and they've got a secondary light on the other side to just give brightness, and while still having a bit of shadow in the midst of all of this. So this is this is something that my nieces could not do. They just did not have the resources to do great lighting, nor the skill to do great lighting. But lighting is something we don't think about, but it really sets a mood and communicates something to us in film in a number of different ways. So to give you an example by comparison, let's go to another close-up. Okay, this is a big close-up. By the way, George is huge. Right? I mean, look at that face, especially if you're in a movie theater. That face could be 30 or 40 feet tall. You're like, whoa, in your face. I mean, I was just thinking, that's kind of a real cinematic term, being in your face. This is a scene in which George has just learned that Potter is not going to take over the building and loan if George agrees to give up college and come back and stay in Bedford Falls and take over. And so it catches George at a moment of, oh. I mean, he's so happy that Potter's not going to get it, but the condition is he has to stay. So it's not quite so optimistic of a moment, and it is darker. And you've got, for instance, he's just put on his hat. You've got those deep shadows over his forehead and his eyes. That gives a brooding sort of sense to this whole thing. And again, you've got light, this time coming from the left, a part of his face, but the other part of his face is in deeper shadow, which also gives a sense of, difficulty and deepness and that sort of thing. And so the lighting communicates also, even without us consciously recognizing us, something George is sensing and thinking and feeling inside. How do you know what somebody is thinking or feeling? In literature, you can do it a number of different ways. You can bring it out, you can actually have the people thinking very specifically there. But visually, how do you do that? And just as we recognize, on a face, a happy face, an angry face, this is communicating in context, something even more than that. By the way, I also want to mention, I had suggested that you see it in black and white instead of color, and this is one of the reasons why. I think the black and white communicates that sense of trouble and brooding more effectively than the color, because this was a film made for black and white, and the filmmaker was very specifically thinking in those terms. If you're filming in color, filmmakers are thinking about lighting in terms of how color works. But one advantage of black and white is you can get shadows and contrast, black and white and grays much more, so getting contrast or even tension more effectively that way. Another close-up. Oh boy. This is the moment in that weird alternative universe when George really realizes, I don't exist. By the way, what a terrible thought. Again, I think this creates the importance of the Imago Dei, the image of God. We are created in the image of God. Our very existence is a good thing. Just our existence is a good thing. And everybody else's existence is a good thing. It would be but to have a consciousness and be conscious that you don't exist, I don't even know what that means. It'll blow my mind. But this is very dark, right? It's mostly dark. The lighting is you can hardly see the right side of his face. Just a little glint of the eyeball, the deep shadows, and of course, it looks like he hasn't shaved and his hair's all mussed up, but this dark background and so forth. Again, just adds to that sense that we get a deeper sense of, oh, how terrible this would be, just from this image. All right, some different things. On other cinematic devices. The other thing, this is just an example of something that Frank Capra does in this film, is that he puts George in crowds. My friend Andrew Rudd called this the one and the many. He puts George in crowds, but George stands out in the crowd. Whatever crowd he is in, he is notable. He's that kind of person. He's got charisma, he's got leadership abilities, and you see that right from the very beginning when they're sliding down the hill, and it's George who's organizing the whole thing. He's the one who's narrating, and so he's surrounded by his friends, but he's the first one in front. He's the first one down the hill. And then later his brother falls through the ice, and it's George that leads and organizes the group to hold on to each other to pull him out. And so that's George, the one and the many. But then what happens is there's a cut. It's a transition from this scene to another scene. And the film does that. You can do scene this is another thing you can do in films. You can do scene transitions in really creative and odd sort of ways. This is a type of cut where actually there's like a line that swipes across the screen. Does it go that way? Yeah, it goes that way from your perspective, from George saving his brother to George walking down the street with his friends. And so that type of transition does is it's for a brief moment we see both Both scenes, two different scenes at the same time. But it is the same thing, because when we switch over to the other, what happens? It's a line of kids, same kids, only George is leading the way again, because that's who George is. He is leading the way, the one and the many. Later on, the dance scene. And of course, he's the protagonist, so that happens. But again, there's George, this time in a more comic way, standing out because he has no idea that he's about ready to fall into the swimming pool. And that's a lot of fun. They just think they're good dancers. Later on, George at the Building and Loan, with the crowd, but standing out, separated by a desk, trying to persuade them, right? About, no, just you keep your money in the Building and Loan. And then I find this very interesting, some very specific scenes, like when they're about ready to leave, he runs over to the door, and they're now just surrounding him. And he's looking out to all of them, and they're wearing their hats, and they're closing in on him, and he's trying to tell them, don't do this thing, don't leave. Potter will win if we do it. And if you go to a scene in where George does not exist, he again is surrounded by all these people, but in a very different kind of situation. Like they're about ready to arrest him, but it's the same people. Notice the guy, I wish I had my pointer. Notice the guy, I think it's Ed, that with his eyes, this time he's wearing a black hat, before he's wearing a white. Capra put him in the same place. It's the same people surrounding George. It communicates that idea. Not only is it the one and the many, but like the world Bedford Falls is different if George is there or not. Because the crowd here, although it's facing a crisis, is different from the crowd here. Anyway, but puts in the same sort of people crowding around George. All right. One more cinematic device. Things that are in the scene. In this case, what we have is, I want you to notice the background. The wall in the back. You see light coming in from the side, lighting again. And it's partially falling on a portrait, a picture. A picture of George's father, who has just died. And here's George's father in this scene kind of looking down on the people. And they're making this is when they're trying to decide what to do with the Building and Loan, and Potter wants to take it over. And George is just, at this point, George has just given them, the basics about, what kind of shape the bank is in. And the father's looking down on them all. And then George gets up to leave. He's going to go. He's going to go off to college. He's going to leave the Building and Loan. And what happens? He's kind of obscuring his father, who's now darker, oddly enough. And then, this more clearly, right? But I have these backwards now that I think about it in terms of order. This is where he first stands up, and he's obscuring his father. And then he starts arguing back at Potter, like why his dad, and you start to see his father creeping out a little bit again. Later on in the film, at a crisis moment, when there's the bank run, his father is still on the wall, and George goes over to think about what's he going to do. Oh, this is a pickle, says Uncle Billy. George is trying to figure out, and there's his father, looking again, with a little saying under the bottom, all you can take with you is that which you've given away. Sounds almost biblical. All right, so those are some tools that you can use. Narrative patterns, visual tropes, cinematic devices, what cameras are doing. There are more. I'm going to give you some more next week, but try not to overload people with all these kinds of, with everything too much. But what I'd like to do now is just go back to a scene. And sometimes it's good after you've seen a film, and actually if you're studying, it's a good idea. You go back and just look at parts of it again and see what you see this time around. Do you see anything different? Or do you see something, oh, yes, that's right, and does it give you any more? So I'm going to show you a scene. This is the bank run scene, which I I think it's a great scene. I actually use it in American history to help teach the Depression, to help students understand bank runs and why the FDIC came along and that sort of thing. But it's as a movie scene, I think it's a great scene. But I'm just going to play this, and then you tell me what you see or hear, anything of note in this scene.
Then what, honey?
After that, who cares?
That doesn't. Come here, come here, come here.
Don't look now, but there's something funny going on over there at the bank, George. I've never really seen one, but that's got all the earmarks of being a run.
Hey, lady, you got any money in the bank? You better hurry.
George, let's not stop. Let's go.
A minute there. Uh-oh.
Please, let's not stop, George.
I'll be back in a minute, Mary. Well, hello, everybody. Miss Thompson, how are you? Charlie, what's the matter here? Can't you get in? What is this, Uncle Billy? A holiday?
George.
Come on in, everybody. That's right. Let's come on in. Come on, Jimmy. Now, look, why don't you all sit down? Here, there are a lot of seats over there. Just make yourself at home.
George, can I see a minute?
Why did you call me?
I just did, but they said you left. This is a pickle, George. This is a pickle.
All right, now, what happened? How did it start?
Well, how does a thing like this ever start? All I know is the bank called our loan.
When?
About an hour ago, I handed over all our cash.
All of it?
Every cent of it, and still was less than we owed them.
Holy mackerel.
And then I got scared, George, and closed the doors.
The whole town's gone crazy.
Yeah, hello? George, it's Potter.
Hello?
George, there is a rumor around town that you've closed your doors. Is that true? Oh, well, I'm very glad to hear that. George, are you all right? Do you need any police?
Police? What for?
Well, mobs get pretty ugly sometimes, you know. George, I am going all out to help in this crisis. I have just guaranteed the bank sufficient funds to meet their needs. They will close up for a week and then reopen.
Just took over the bank.
I may lose a fortune, but I am willing to guarantee your people, too. Just tell them to bring their shares over here, and I will pay 50 cents on the dollar.
Oh, you never miss a trick, do you, Potter? Well, you're gonna miss this one.
If you close your doors before 6 p.m., you will never reopen.
George, was it a nice wedding? Gosh, I wanted to be there.
Yeah. You can take this one off now. Now, just remember that this thing isn't as black as it appeared. I have some news for you, folks. I was just talking to old man Potter, and he's guaranteed cash payments to the bank. The bank's going to reopen next week.
But, George, I got my money here.
Did he guarantee this place?
Well, no, Charlie, I didn't even ask him. We don't need Potter over here.
And I'll take mine now.
No, but you're thinking of this place all wrong, as if I had the money back in a safe. The money's not here. Well, your money's in Joe's house. That's right next to yours. And in the Kennedy house, and Mrs. Maitland's house, and 100 others. You're lending them the money to build, and then they're going to pay it back to you as best they can. Now, what are you going to do, foreclose on them?
I got $242 in here, and $242 isn't going to break anybody.
Okay, Tom. All right. Here you are. You sign this. You get your money in 60 days.
60 days?
Well, now, that's what you agreed to when you bought your shares.
Tom, did you get your money?
No.
Well, I did. Old man Potter will pay 50 cents on the dollar for every share you got.
50 cents on the dollar?
Yes, cash.
Well, what do you say?
No, Tom, you have to stick to your original agreement. Now, give us 60 days on this
Okay,
thing.
Randall.
Are you going to Potter's?
Better to get half than nothing.
That's what I need
Tom! Randall, now, Randall, wait. Now, wait. Now, listen. Now, listen to me. I beg of you not to do this thing. If Potter gets a hold of this building and alone, there'll never be another decent house built in this town. He's already got charge of the bank, he's got the bus line, he got the department stores, and now he's after us. Why? Well, it's very simple. Because we're cutting in on his business, that's why. And because he wants to keep you living in his slums and paying the kind of rent he decides. Joe, you had one of those Potter houses, didn't you? Well, have you forgotten? Have you forgotten what he charged you for that broken-down shack? Here, Ed, you remember last year when things weren't going so well and you couldn't make your payments? Well, you didn't lose your house, did you? You think Potter would have let you keep it? Can't you understand what's happening here? Don't you see what's happening? Potter isn't selling, Potter's buying. And why? Because we're panicky and he's not, that's why. He's picking up some bargain. Now, we can get through this thing all right. We've got to stick together, though. We've got to have faith in each other.
But my husband hasn't worked in over a year, and I need money.
How am I going to live until the bank opens?
I got doctor bills to pay. I need cash.
I can't keep my kids on faith. I've got to have...
How much do you need?